You know, when these terrible things happen, like the terrorist attack in New York, which I have to admit, New York is kind of, if I had a hometown, it would be New York. I've traveled all over, but New York is kind of my hometown. When these things happen in New York, they do bug me a little bit more than other times. I always try not to do too much commentary about things like this, and there's a reason for it. There's not that much to say. I mean, obviously, it's a terrible, it's tragic for the people who have lost someone, but you know, and I hate piety. I hate the kind of, you know, solemnity that it requires. Obviously, I am, you know, solemn about the people who died, but there's not that much to say. So what I really do want to talk about is the way we talk about these things. I mean, this is a guy, his name was Safulo Saipov, 29 years old. He drove he rented a truck at Home Depot. He rented this Home Depot truck, drove it onto one of these bike paths they have in New York, right around where the World Trade Center used to be, or actually still, now the new one is, ran people down, jumped up out with shouting Allahu Akbar, and started running. He had guns, but they were not actual. It turns out they were not actual pistols. They were a paintball gun and stuff like this. But those obviously are dangerous as well. Let's listen to Mayor De Blasio's. This is the first comment he made, not the comment on vetting. Yeah, this is number 6.
A very painful day in our city. Horrible tragedy on the West Side. Let me be clear that based on the information we have at this moment, this was an act of terror, and a particularly cowardly act of terror aimed at innocent civilians, aimed at people going about their lives who had no idea of what was about to hit them. We, at this moment, based on the information we have, we know of 8 innocent people who have lost their lives.
So let's start right there with cowardly. They always say this about terrorist attacks. There's nothing cowardly about them. They're evil, but they're not cowardly. Courage is an amoral virtue, right? You know, Adolf Hitler had courage. He won the Iron Cross in World War I, but that didn't stop him from being evil. In fact, it's even worse when somebody has courage. What the guy is, when Trump got this exactly right, the guy is a loser. He is a loser. He has nothing to contribute to society. He has nothing good to build. It's easy to kill. It's easy to destroy. It's impossible to build up. You know, when I saw them fly the planes into the World Trade Center, you know, my thought was, okay, you know, you're dancing in the streets and you're congratulating each other. Let's see you invent a plane. Let's see you build a building. Let's see you do something that matters to humankind, because anybody, I mean, it's like a kid in a playground who sits there and builds this elaborate block structure, and the bully comes over and kicks it down. Bully may not be a coward. He's just a thug. He's a loser. He has nothing he can't do what that kid who builds things can do. And that's what these are. These are guys from failed societies, and they're failed for a reason that we will talk about. You know, but to call them cowardly, it just doesn't resonate, because they know they're not. We know it's, you know, when you just sling insults at people, it doesn't matter. They're not cowardly. They're evil, and they're losers. And that was what Trump was right about. We should celebrate the NYPD. We've got to celebrate this guy, Ryan Nash. He was a uniformed police officer. This was like out of Blue Bloods, you know? It's like this guy is a uniformed police officer. He's out looking for what they call an EDP, an emotionally disturbed person. Probably somebody wandered off. And he sees this guy with his 2 weapons running away, and he shot him. Now, you think like, okay, well, that's what he's supposed to do. But you got to think about it. Put your imagination in there for a minute. This guy doesn't know, is he a drunk driver? He doesn't know if he's like, you know, what he is. And he has to make that call. And as we know, if he makes the wrong call, and he's a white guy, for instance, and he shoots a brown guy, you know, I mean, the guy can be crucified. So he really has to make the call, and he did. And he, you know, kept this guy from getting away. He kept him from hurting other people. It really, so that's Ryan Nash. And the Wall Street Journal had a point when they said, you know, when they said most New Yorkers regard it as a small miracle that terrorism's success in the city has been minimal, but it's not a miracle. Protecting the city's sprawling tableau falls to the New York City Police Department, and it must be noted that its record in the years following 9/11 has been stellar. The NYPD's anti-terrorism unit is a model of relentless vigilance and cooperation with security agencies in the U.S. and in Europe. Vigilance and cooperation are the 2 indispensable tools in ensuring that the terrorist world remains abnormal. And, you know, I just want to add to that they have done this with the New York Times and other liberals, dragging them down for everything. They exposed the fact that they were surveilling mosques and working to get informants in mosques, and they went after them for this, and they stopped. They've got the lawyers after it, just like they did with Stop and Frisk, this very successful program that was taking guns off the street. And we know that the New York Times hates guns, but it's okay if the guns are in the hands of criminals, if the criminals are in some kind of identity that they approve of. They had this excellent thing where they would, listen, a cop, I've known a lot of cops, I've talked to a lot of cops. A cop can tell if you are holding a gun. He can tell it from a mile away. You stand with a cop and he will say, yeah, strapped, strapped, strapped. He knows when the guys have guns. They just do. They can see the weight. They can see the way the pants are. And so they were letting people, if the guy was acting suspiciously, they could go up and question him, and then they could search him. And they deemed this stop and frisk, and they hammered them and went after this. And eventually, the NYPD has compensated for it, and they've kept it from raising the murder rate. But it could have raised the murder rate, and it may yet. And I think they've also done everything they can to hamper the surveillance of mosques and Muslims and getting informants in the Muslim world. And I think all of that stuff, everything the NYPD is all the more miraculous because of the relentless attacks by the Times and other leftists in New York. So Donald Trump, who I think is our president, he came out, he started tweeting and blamed Chuck Schumer. The terrorist came into our country through what is called the diversity visa lottery program, a Chuck Schumer beauty, and I want merit-based immigration. Schumer's trying to wiggle out of being responsible for the diversity visa lottery program. He was, in fact, one of its main sponsors while he was then in the House, I believe. But this is back in the 80s and 90s. And, Trump's larger point is right. His larger point is right. But the thing that got me about this is Schumer immediately said, "Oh, you're politicizing a tragedy," which is to laugh. And the media picked this up. Joe Scarborough, he's immediately, "This is terrible." This is cut number one from Scarborough.
That they were united with him.
Yeah.
And so here you have the President of the United States now, Donald Trump, 16 years later, using a terrorist attack when we should all come together to take cheap political shots against members of the opposing party. Now is not the time. Now is not the place. And this is not what Americans need from their president. Not just this president, any president. We need somebody that can bring us together in these times.
Yeah.
Let's go back into the vast distances of time, like a month ago, after the Vegas attacks that we still don't know we still don't have really an idea what the motive, if anything, was there. Here's Joe Scarborough then.
9 out of 10 Americans, 9 out of 10 Americans support background checks, enhanced background checks. Would that have done anything here? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. It would make America a safer place. Might keep guns out of the hands of people who abuse their spouses. It might keep guns out of the hands of people who abuse their children. It might keep guns out of the hands of terrorists. Certainly something that law enforcement officers, the cop that protects you, wants.
So here's, obviously the hypocrisy. The hypocrisy is big in this one. The hypocrisy is huge. Chuck Schumer, all the Democrats immediately politicized the Vegas attacks, immediately went for the gun control thing. The difference is that gun control won't stop attacks like the Vegas attack. We know that. And political approaches do apply to Islam, to Islamic attacks, Islamic terrorism, because this is a political issue. This is a political religious issue. Now, I think that the one thing I will score Trump on is he shouldn't have gone after Schumer. Chuck Schumer doesn't want there to be terrorist attacks. He may be wrong about stuff, and it's right. His larger point, Trump's larger point, that we need to look at our immigration system and all these things meant to stop us from, controlling immigration, controlling our borders, and keeping out people who don't like us, who have philosophies that are antithetical to what we believe in. He's right about that. But yes, I do not believe he should go after Chuck Schumer. But Lindsey Graham, points out that he had just had a conversation with Trump, and he points out that the thing about Trump is, as opposed to Barack Obama for 8 years, who wouldn't even say the word Islam, Donald Trump understands what's going on here.
The one thing I like about President Trump, he understands that we're in a religious war.
And to the American people, we're fighting people who are compelled by their religious views to kill us all. They kill fellow Muslims who don't agree with their view of Islam. They kill Christians and vegetarians, libertarians, Jews, you name it. So we're in a war, and for the last 8 years, the Obama administration turned the war into a crime. So I talked to the president tonight. He is right to make sure that when somebody comes into our country from a place where radical Islam, and that's the enemy, thrives, that we're going to ask extra hard questions. He's also right to look at this as a war. The last thing I want this guy to hear tonight is you have a right to a lawyer. The last thing he should hear is his Miranda rights. I've been a military lawyer for 33 years. There's enough evidence to believe that he qualifies as an enemy combatant under the law of war. He can be held by our intelligence community as long as necessary to find out, did he act alone and was he part of a bigger plot?
So, I mean, this is much closer to reality than what the Obama administration was selling us for 8 years. We are in a war of philosophy, a religious war. We have this tolerant openness to religions, to various religions, but there is such a thing as a religion that will not fit into that structure because it doesn't tolerate other religions. You know, this is the thing that is in Islam. There is a political aspect to Islam, not radical Islam, all Islam. There is a political aspect. It is meant to be a political religion, and that will not fit into our secular world, our secular governance. Our government is based on Christian morals, but it is not itself Christian, because in Christianity is the idea that you render unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and you render unto God what belongs to God. In Christianity is the idea of secular governance. So, but we have to look at what I have to get to, and this is always what drives me a little nuts, is the way the media covers this is the opposite of honest. You do remember Fawlty Towers? Does anybody remember Fawlty Towers? Am I the only guy who remembers? This is John Cleese. After Monty Python, John Cleese had this hilarious show called Fawlty Towers about an incompetent innkeeper. And one time in Fawlty Towers, this German group comes to the inn, and he becomes panicked that somebody is going to mention World War II in front of this. And that's, if you ever hear this, the kind of meme, "Don't mention the war." This is the scene that it comes from, where he's telling people, don't mention the war in front of the Germans, but he can't stop doing it.
Don't mention the war. I mentioned it once, but I think I got away with it all right. So, it's all forgotten now, and let's hear no more about it. So that's 2 egg mayonnaise, a prawn Goebbels, a Hermann Goring, and 4 colded salads. Oh, wait a minute, I got a bit confused here. Sorry, I got a bit confused because everyone keeps mentioning the war. So could you... What's the matter?
It's all right.
Is there something wrong?
Will you stop talking about the war?
Me? You started it?
We did not start it.
Yes, you did. You invaded Poland.
That's one of the funniest shows ever on television. It really was. So don't mention the war. Don't mention Islam. That is the way the news reports. Chris Matthews, here's his reaction to what happened.
As an Uzbeki, why would he have an animus toward the United States? Do we have it has anything to do with geopolitics over in the former Soviet Union, like those Chechens who created the horror at the Boston Marathon?
Way too soon to answer that question. A good question. You know, he was earning a living here in the United States, earning a living as a truck driver, seems to have been integrated into society. We've talked to one person who says he was a friend of his, saw no sign of this, didn't hear him spouting radical propaganda, seemed to be a friendly person. So that's just a complete cipher at this point.
It's a chin scratcher, all right. The guy's from Uzbekistan. Did we invade Uzbekistan lately? Is that what it is? I mean, did we do something wrong in Uzbekistan? What the hell is he talking about? Is it some kind of geopolitical something that may have, you know, the guy got out of the car shouting Allahu Akbar, and nobody wants to report that either. They kept saying, oh, he said, God is great, God is great. You know, it's like, that's not what he said. He said Allahu Akbar. And by the way, Robert Spencer, who is he's an anti-Islam guy, but he's also a very scholarly guy. He says media outlets routinely mangle the true meaning of Allahu Akbar, the ubiquitous battle cry of Islamic jihadists as they commit mass murder. The war cry is mistranslated in the Western media as God is great, but the actual meaning is Allah is greater, meaning Allah is greater than your God or your government. It is the aggressive declaration that Allah and Islam are dominant over every other form of government, religion, law, or ethic. Now, That's Robert Spencer talking. He knows what he's talking about, but he also has a very central point of view. But CNN, I mean, CNN outdid itself. And this is getting to where I got into this little squabble with Jake Tapper on Twitter. But CNN, the guy is reporting the story. This is cut number 3, and he gets information, and he won't tell the people the information. Listen to this.
What I'm told is, as he was driving, he eventually maybe perhaps tried to get away, and he struck a school bus. And at some point, police encountered him and shot him. And so now he's at Bellevue Hospital. Police know who he is. They have a description of him. I'm not going to share that at the moment, but they know who he is. He is alive at the moment. And basically, it looks like, you know, they're going to try and talk to him. I'm going to stop right there in terms of all the information. But that is what we can report at this moment.
I'm a journalist. My job is to give you information. I have information from an official source. I'm not giving it to you. That's what he said. This is what he said. You know, back in the 80s, the New York Times, afraid that people would when it was still very high crime in New York, the New York Times got afraid that people would start to notice that a lot of the criminals were black, so they stopped giving that information. So they would give you the description from the police, but they would leave that out. Now, if you think about it, what good is a description of some, you know, he's on the run, he's on the loose, be on the lookout for a guy. I'm not going to tell you what color he is, but he's tall. He's really tall. And, you know, I mean, he has kind of a big nose, but I can't tell you what color he is. I mean, that's what these guys are doing. Why doesn't he want to give you the information? Because the guy was an Islamist. Okay, so now finally the truth comes out. CNN can't hide it anymore. They actually are forced to give you the information. You know, they're a news organization forced to give you the news. And Jake Tapper gets the news that this guy said Allahu Akbar, and here's his reaction.
Police have now talked to, they're telling police that they heard the driver yelling Allahu Akbar during this incident, which is now leading authorities to believe that this is as a result that this is now a terrorism case. And I'm just getting an update now. The FBI is taking over this case because it appears now that this is terrorism.
The Arabic chant, Allah Akbar, God is great, sometimes said under the most beautiful of circumstances, and too often we hear of it being said in moments like this.
So I went on Twitter and said, yeah, there are very fine people on both sides, you know, because this is exactly what Donald Trump did. And that, you know, they misconstrued what Donald Trump said. He was talking about the, you know, people in the statues. And he said there are very fine people on both sides of the statue issue. And they misconstrued it to mean that he was saying there are very fine people among the white supremacists. But as I said at the time, he did make a mistake. When somebody has been killed by a white supremacist, the question is not whether there are nice people who want to keep the statues up. That's the time for the president to come out and say, hey, these white supremacists stink. It stinks. It's a sin to be a white supremacist. It's a sin to be a Nazi. That's the time to say that. When a guy just ran down 8 innocent people, killed 8 innocent people and injured over a dozen more, you know, it's not the time to point out that Allahu Akbar is sometimes said. So when I attacked him for it, he said, I said the words can be said in beautiful circumstances. This is him responding to me. Weddings and births and also too often at times like this. And then he called, actually, you know, Roger Simon wrote about this. So he was really calling, Roger Simon kind of misquoted him on the Twitter thing. And so he was calling him a liar. But then he started calling me a liar. And I thought, like, wait a minute. Nazis say things at beautiful occasions too. They say Zig Heil at weddings, maybe. You know, what the hell does that have to do with anything? It's because the left is committed, and the press is committed to conflating identity with philosophy. Okay, it is no sin to be any color that God makes. It is not a good or bad thing to be any color that God makes. It is part of God's handiwork. Your philosophy, you choose. You choose your philosophy, and there are good and bad philosophies. And so when people say, hey, you know, there's a problem. Here's, you know, there was a book called Islamic, what was the name of the book? It'll come to me. The point of the book, and it was written by an Islamic guy, was that Islam is different than Islamic exceptionalism. That's what it was called. And the point of it was Islam is different from other religions in 2 ways. One is that it has a political element. So you can't essentially be an Islamic person without believing that Islam should have a political role. And of course, the radical Islamists, the guys who are in favor of Sharia law, those are the people who are a problem. You know, it's not a problem if you just want to go and pray. Nobody cares in America how you pray. No, zero people care how you pray. They may want to convert you to their religion. They may want to preach to you their religion is better, but nobody is going to hurt you because of how you pray, except the worst evildoer, and every country has evildoers. But it is a problem if your philosophy is antithetical to Western governance. That's a problem. And that is the stuff that should be debated, whether Islam itself is antithetical to Western governance or whether it's only radical Islam. And how many Islamic people can we have in before that becomes an issue? Because the other thing about Islam is they worship the very words of the Quran. You know, the Bible, people sometimes say the Bible is the Word of God. The Bible is not the Word of God. In the Bible, it says that Jesus is the Word of God. The Bible is people reporting on what the Word of God did. So we do not worship the words in the Bible. And that's why I'm always, fighting with people who say, well, it says here, it says this here, it says this here. And I think, yeah, well, what is Jesus saying? What happened there? That's the story. But in Islam, the actual words in Arabic, you can't translate the Quran, in Arabic are what they worship. So there's no debating it. There's no talking about it. And that is a big problem. All right. That's why I was arguing with Jake Tapper. I mean, Jake, ever since he went to CNN, I think he's kind of lost his way. It's just that place. It's kind of like with Brett Stevens going over to the New York Times. I think after you're just surrounded by those people, ultimately it starts to seep into your consciousness.